Welcome to my video on using evidence in your writing, in which I'm going to explain how you use quotations and how you paraphrase. I'll tell you something about why and when you use evidence, how exactly you use quotations, how you paraphrase, and finally I'll say something about references. We'll start with the why and when. Now, first of all, when do you use evidence? Well, basically, you use evidence in any piece of writing that you're going to do from now onwards. That could be an essay, argumentative, or literary. In both, you need to use PEE paragraphs. So, a paragraph that you start with a topic sentence, that you follow with evidence, and you always have to explain that evidence as well. And then the evidence bit here is where you use a quotation or where you paraphrase. So this is where you use knowledge that you have found somewhere else. So text that you found somewhere else. You have to use quotations and paraphrases that are clearly recognizable because you have to avoid plagiarism. Now, plagiarism is when you steal someone else's words or ideas, so you really have to be very careful about that. Now, first of all, let's take a look at quotation. Now, for quotation, you always use quotation marks, as you can see right here. That means that it's very recognizable that these words are not your own words. Now, quotations are usually used for very short passages, so one sentence, perhaps two or three sentences, but you're not supposed to actually write down or copy down entire paragraphs from the book or the website that you're using. So really short and to the point. This is about information that you really cannot summarize in your own words, or information that you just want to analyze very closely. So then you use quotation marks. Now, an example of this, I have taken the book To Kill a Mockingbird here, written by Harper Lee. Now, what you always have to do when you write something using quotation marks is that you have to mention the author of the text, the year of publishing, and that's the publishing of the book that you have in front of you, and the page or page numbers that you found the text on. Now, To Kill a Mockingbird was originally written in 1960 or published in 1960, but my edition comes from 1982, so that's why I use 1982. And I've chosen to work with the first sentence of the novel, which is, when he was nearly 13, my brother Jem got his arm badly broken at the elbow. Now, as you can see, there are quotation marks very clearly indicated here. And you can see that between brackets, I've mentioned the last name of the author, Lee, the year, and the page number. And if you choose to quote in this way, then you have to mention it in this order. So author, year, and page number. And for the page number, you always use P, full stop, number. Now you can also play around with this a bit, because when you're writing an essay, you do want to use variation and you want your work to be very readable as well. And so you could also opt for going for something like Lee, 1982, writes that, blah, 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 and then at the end mention a page number. Or you could do it differently, where you say on page 3, the main character Scout tells the reader that, you give your quote, and then you end with the author's name and the year of publishing. Now, for paraphrasing, however, it's quite a different beast. Now, paraphrasing is when you summarize the text in your own words. So basically, you take the main idea of something that has been presented and then describe that. And you can use this for ideas that are used, and you can use this for images, for instance, in the text that you describe. But paraphrasing is mostly very suitable for very long passages. So really you want to describe this longer event, but you can't quote so many sentences. So you really just take the gist and you transform that into your own summary. Now, you have to be careful here. So the common mistake that is made here is that people think, okay, so I have to put it into my own words, and then they start replacing words. Then you're not summarizing the idea of the text. Then you're just replacing words, and basically you're still plagiarizing the sentence structure here. So when you want to use the sentence, paraphrasing is not replacing words with your own words. It's best to just use quotation marks here because it's a very short sentence. You can easily use quotation marks, and really you're not going to be able to summarize this nicely in your own words here. So saying paraphrasing isn't substituting the author's text with your own text. That's not an acceptable way of paraphrasing. Just use quotation marks here. So how do you paraphrase? Again, you have to mention the author and the year, and the pages as well. Now, paraphrasing is used when you use longer excerpts, so you usually will have to mention multiple pages. Now, how do you do that? You use PP, full stop, and then you mention the page number where it starts and the page number where it ends. So here I've quoted, or no, I've paraphrased from Jonathan Safran's work, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. And I've taken an excerpt that started on page 208 and ended on 216. I've also included a paraphrase from To Kill a Mockingbird here as well. So Scout starts her story by describing her brother's broken arm. Now here I summarize the entire first paragraph because that's what she actually does in the first paragraph. She describes how Jam's been walking around with his arm at a weird angle. So this is where you could paraphrase that very accurately. Now, for instance, when you want to describe images or a longer sequence, now Jonathan Safran Foer uses lots of images in his books or weird typography, unusual typography, where you really just want to describe what's going on. Now, a good way of paraphrasing here would be to say, it becomes clear on these pages that Thomas, who's already avidly corrected language errors in newspapers when confronted with his father's letter, increasingly circled his writing in red, even though there are no apparent language mistakes at the end of the letter. If you put your information here in brackets at the end of this passage, and it's clear that the pages that you're referring to, so on these pages, is the text where Thomas, so Oscar's father, has been circling his father's letter in red. And then you don't actually have to quote, you don't have to substitute your words, you just describe what you've seen, you summarize what happens on these 8 pages. Now, whenever you use evidence, you always have to use references. Always include a list of references, even if you just use one work. If it's just one novel, just one article, you still have to mention that list. And you only have to mention the sources that you've used in your text. So sources that you've actually referred to the way that we've just been discussing. So you don't have to include sources that you've looked at but haven't used in your actual writing. Now you can use the guidelines that you've received from your Dutch teacher, the guidelines that really illustrate how you have to make a list of references. But you could also use the OWL Purdue site or Scribr, where you have an APA generator, but really it's not that difficult to learn this by heart. What you have to keep in mind is that there are several editions of APA, and they're not all the same, but if you use one of these editions, then you're fine. And so to conclude my video and my explanation, here is the list of references that I've used for this video. And I've used APA edition 7 here, for which you have to mention the author, his last name, his initials, year of publishing, title of the work in italics, and then the publisher. and you have to put this in alphabetical order. So this is how you use quotations, how you use paraphrases, and how you include your list of references. And good luck with your preparations. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask them.